No, he was number 7.
You know, I don't actually give a I hate everyone. I hate everyone ranked in front of me.
So here's how two UFC lightweights went from friendly backstage conversations to one of the nastiest feuds we've ever witnessed. What started as casual trash talk turned into something much darker when personal boundaries got completely destroyed, and the moment that changed everything is coming up next. The MMA world has always embraced a certain level of verbal warfare as part of building fights. Competitors regularly promise violence, attack each other's courage, and play mind games designed to create buzz and mess with their opponents before the cage door even closes. Think about Conor McGregor's legendary psychological attacks, Chael Sonnen's wrestling-style promos, or the countless press conference explosions that have become just as entertaining as the actual fights. But even in this world of accepted hostility, there are still unspoken rules, invisible boundaries that separate entertaining promotion from genuinely personal attacks that cut deeper than any punch or kick ever could. On January 9th, 2026, around 8:12 a.m. GMT, Dan Hooker decided to fire back at Pimblett's inflammatory remarks, and what he did next crossed a line that many consider even worse than Pimblett's original mother comment. Hooker went to X and posted a video clip from their friendly encounter at UFC Qatar back in November 2025, the same footage that had gone viral as a perfect example of fighter respect, but the words he added to this video carried a completely different energy. Those final two words, RAP Ricky with dove and tombstone emojis, turned ordinary social media beef into something genuinely disturbing. Hooker was directly referencing Ricky Warwick, Pimblett's close friend who took his own life on July 21st, 2022, just hours before Pimblett's weigh-in against Jordan Leavitt. This was the same friend whose death Pimblett had revealed in that emotional post-fight interview, the same tragedy that sparked Pimblett's passionate work in men's mental health advocacy. The psychological damage of bringing up someone's suicide cannot be overstated. This kind of loss creates unique trauma that ripples through entire circles of friends and family who struggle to make sense of what happened. For Pimblett, who had been completely open about how devastating Ricky's death was to his life and career, seeing his friend's name thrown into a Twitter argument must have hit like a sledgehammer. This wasn't just an attack on his fighting skills or his personality. This was weaponizing his grief, his loss, and all the work he'd done to turn tragedy into something meaningful. Hooker's post exploded across the platform. 6,500 likes, 212 reposts, 294 replies, and a massive 1.7 million views. The MMA community was glued to their screens, and everyone was already picking sides about who had gone too far. But Hooker wasn't done yet. Just 17 minutes later at 8:29 a.m. GMT, he posted again with an even more direct threat. The phrase "on site" carries very specific meaning. It's basically a promise to throw hands the second you see someone, with zero discussion or hesitation. This wasn't promotional theater anymore. This was a straight-up threat of real violence that had nothing to do with sanctioned competition. This second post went even more viral. 18,000 likes, 37,356 reposts, 43 replies, and 1.3 million views. What started as social media drama had officially become threats of actual street violence. For hours, Pimblett stayed quiet while the MMA world erupted into heated debates about who was more wrong. Social media became a battlefield with fans, fighters, analysts, and random observers all throwing in their opinions. Everyone was defending their guy while attacking the other, creating comment threads that stretched into the hundreds with nothing but anger and accusations flying back and forth. Some people argued that bringing up a friend's suicide, especially considering Pimblett's mental health advocacy work and how raw that wound still was, represented the absolute lowest blow possible, an attack so sacred that nothing could justify it. They pointed to everything Pimblett had done since Ricky's death, the money raised for mental health organizations, the conversations started about male suicide prevention, and argued that using this tragedy for Twitter beef showed a level of heartlessness that went way beyond normal fighter trash talk. Finally, at 3:02 p.m. GMT, Pimblett broke his silence with a response that accepted Hooker's challenge while calling out his tactics. In one tweet, Pimblett managed to do several things at once. He threw Hooker's previous comments about hating higher-ranked fighters back in his face, turning their old friendly conversation into ammunition for this war. Pimblett held the number 5 spot in the lightweight rankings, while Hooker had dropped to around 8 or 9 after losing to Sarukian. He tried to downplay his original comment as just a hypothetical hypothetical joke about grappling, which most people thought was a pretty weak explanation for how offensive it actually was. Most importantly, he directly called out Hooker for bringing up his dead friend, labeling it the lowest of the low. Pimblett's response got 3,100 likes, 73 reposts, 336 replies, and 29,000 views. And with that final shot, the exchange seemed to end, with neither fighter posting anything else as the night went on, leaving everyone to process what they'd just witnessed. The timing made this whole situation even more complicated. Pimblett was just 15 days away from the biggest fight of his career, an interim UFC lightweight title bout against Justin Gaethje at UFC 3T4 on January 24, 2026. This represented Pimblett's first real shot at championship gold. Meanwhile, Hooker was set to face Benoit Sandani at UFC 325 on January 31, 2026. Both guys had massive professional commitments coming up fast, but neither seemed willing to back down from this personal war. In the brutal theater of mixed martial arts, where fighters regularly beat each other unconscious for entertainment, there's still an unwritten code, invisible boundaries that even the most savage competitors instinctively know should never be crossed. These boundaries rarely get talked about openly, but everyone in the fighting world understands they exist. And on January 9th, 2026, two of the UFC's most compelling lightweight contenders didn't just cross that line, they completely obliterated it, leaving nothing but burned bridges and the destroyed remains of what many thought was a genuine friendship built through shared competition. This story of Paddy Pimblett and Dan Hooker's explosive social media war represents one of the most dramatic and deeply personal feuds in recent UFC history. A confrontation involving dead friends, mothers, and the kind of verbal warfare that makes regular trash talk look like polite small talk. But to really understand how massive this breakdown was, we need to examine the complex web of events that led to this catastrophic destruction of their relationship, and understand exactly who these fighters are and what drives them to compete at the highest level of combat sports. Paddy the Baddy Pimblett stands as one of the most polarizing figures in modern mixed martial arts, a fighter whose very existence seems designed to create extreme reactions from everyone watching. Born January 3rd, 1995 in Liverpool, England, this charismatic Scouser has built an empire on undeniable fighting skills, infectious personality, and willingness to speak his mind no matter what consequences might follow. At just 31 years old, Pimblett has compiled an impressive professional record of 23 wins against only 3 losses, with his submission game accounting for 10 of those victories and his evolving striking adding another 7 knockout finishes. But maybe more impressive than these numbers is his perfect record inside the UFC's octagon, a flawless 7-0 run that launched him from regional circuit favorite to one of the most talked about fighters on the planet. His path to UFC stardom began long before his promotional debut in 2021, stretching back through years of development in the crucible of European mixed martial arts. As former Cage Warriors featherweight champion, Pimblett dominated the European scene with a combination of technical grappling and an almost supernatural ability to create excitement wherever he fought. His UFC debut against Luigi Vendramini ended spectacularly with a TKO finish that earned Performance of the Night honors and announced to the MMA world that a new star had arrived on the sport's biggest stage. Follow-up victories over Jordan Leavitt, Jared Gordon, Tony Ferguson, Bobby Crane, and most significantly Michael Chandler in 2025, a knockout that represented his most impressive achievement yet, established Pimblett as a legitimate force in the lightweight division. But Pimblett's career story goes far beyond wins and losses, knockouts, and submissions. In July 2022, following his submission victory over Jordan Leavitt at UFC London, Pimblett revealed to the world that he had learned of his close friend Ricky's suicide just hours before the weigh-ins. In one of the most emotionally charged post-fight interviews in UFC history, with tears streaming down his face and his voice breaking with grief, Pimblett used his platform to deliver a passionate plea for men's mental health awareness. He declared that there's a stigma in this world that men can't talk about their feelings and begged anyone contemplating such a devastating decision to please speak to anyone about their struggles. The weight of what Pimblett had carried into that fight was almost impossible for observers to comprehend. Here was a man who had learned of his best friend's death just hours before he needed to make weight for a professional fight, who had somehow compartmentalized that devastating grief long enough to step into the octagon and secure a submission victory, and who then chose to use his moment of triumph to advocate for others who might be suffering in silence. The authenticity of his emotion was undeniable. This wasn't promotional theater, but genuine human vulnerability displayed before millions of viewers. That moment transcended sport entirely, transforming Pimblett from merely a talented fighter into a genuine advocate for mental health awareness, a cause he has championed consistently ever since. His subsequent work has included funding charities like James's Place in his beloved Liverpool, an organization dedicated to providing professional support to men experiencing suicidal crisis. He has spoken repeatedly in interviews about the importance of breaking down barriers that prevent men from seeking help, about toxic masculinity that convinces men they must suffer in silence, and about his determination to honor Ricky's memory by preventing others from making the same tragic choice. The vulnerability Pimblett displayed in that post-fight interview earned him respect from corners of the sporting world that had previously dismissed him as merely a loudmouthed or regional fighter. On the other side of this brewing conflict stands Dan the Hangman Hooker, a 35-year-old New Zealand veteran whose journey through UFC reads like a testament to human resilience, determination, and unrelenting will to compete at the highest level despite setbacks that would have broken lesser competitors. Born February 13, 1990 in Auckland, Hooker brings a wealth of experience to every engagement, having accumulated a professional record of 24 victories against 13 defeats throughout his lengthy career. Standing 6 feet tall with an impressive 75-inch reach that allows him to control distance and pick apart opponents from range. Hooker's kickboxing background, he claimed the King in the Ring middleweight championship before transitioning to MMA, makes him a formidable striker who has shared the octagon with virtually every significant lightweight contender of the modern era. Hooker's UFC career, spanning over a decade since his 2014 debut, represents the quintessential journey of a true warrior. While his approximately 14-9 UFC record may not shine with the same undefeated luster as Pimblett's pristine run, the quality of opposition he has faced tells a far more compelling story. His legendary 5-round war with Dustin Poirier in 2020 remains one of the greatest lightweight contests ever witnessed, a brutal display of heart and skill that earned both men eternal respect from the MMA community. Though Hooker ultimately fell short in that contest, the performance demonstrated his willingness to stand and trade with the division's elite, absorbing devastating punishment while continuing to fire back with his own combinations. His split decision victory over Paul Felder, a fight of the night classic that saw both men empty everything they had over 5 grueling rounds, and his win over Matez Gamrot in 2024 cemented his reputation as someone who refuses to be an easy night for anyone. Training out of the legendary City Kickboxing Gym in Auckland alongside Israel Adesanya and other elite fighters, Hooker has developed a striking game that combines technical precision with genuine knockout power. His long reach allows him to control distance and pick apart opponents from the outside, while his durability enables him to survive moments when that distance gets breached. Yet his recent submission loss to Arman Tsarukyan at UFC Qatar in November 2025 exposed ongoing vulnerabilities in his grappling defense, weaknesses that would soon become the subject of cruel mockery from an unexpected source. Before January 2026, the relationship between these two men appeared to be nothing short of cordial, maybe even friendly, if available evidence could be believed. At UFC Qatar in November 2025, where Hooker was competing against Arman Tsarukyan, the two fighters crossed paths backstage during weigh-ins. Pimblett was in Qatar to corner a teammate, and the two lightweights found themselves chatting during pre-fight festivities. Video footage from that encounter shows them talking amicably, laughing together, displaying none of the animosity that would soon consume their relationship. The body language was relaxed, the conversation appeared genuine, and anyone watching the interaction would have had no reason to suspect these two men harbored any ill will toward each other. While defending Gaethje's age, the American was 37 at the time, Pimblett drew a comparison to Hooker, stating with his characteristic Liverpool bluntness that people were calling Justin Gaethje old, but he was only 2 years older than Dan Hooker. Then came the comment that ignited the firestorm, a vulgar, crude remark suggesting that Dan Hooker's grappling abilities were so terrible that he couldn't even defend his own mother in a hypothetical assault scenario. The exact wording was crude enough to mock Hooker's grappling defense, while simultaneously involving his mother in an extreme and offensive manner. The clips spread across social media platforms like wildfire, shared and reshared by accounts like ChampRayDS on X, dissected and debated by fans and analysts alike. For many observers, Pimblett's comment represented a significant escalation from typical fight promotion banter. Involving an opponent's mother in such a scenario crossed a line that many felt should remain sacred. In the immediate aftermath of this explosive social media confrontation, the UFC and its leadership remained conspicuously silent. Dana White, the promotion's president and typically a reliable source for commentary on fighter controversies, offered no public statements regarding the Pimblett-Hooker feud. This silence could be interpreted several ways. Perhaps the UFC viewed the conflict as a personal matter between two adult competitors, or perhaps they recognized that any official commentary might only add fuel to an already raging fire. Alternatively, the promotion might have been quietly pleased with the attention this beef was generating for two fighters with imminent high-profile bouts. The contrast between this sudden enmity and their cordial November 2025 interaction made the feud all the more jarring to observers who had witnessed their friendly backstage exchange at UFC Qatar. Hooker's decision to share that footage alongside his initial attack served as pointed commentary on what he perceived as Pimblett's two-faced behavior, friendly in person but disparaging when speaking to media outlets without Hooker present to respond. Media coverage of the incident was extensive, with outlets including MMA Fighting, Low Kick MMA, BGPNEN.com, and others providing detailed breakdowns of the exchange. Most coverage emphasized the shock value of the confrontation while noting its isolated nature. This was a single explosive exchange rather than an ongoing rivalry with deep historical roots. The speed with which the relationship had deteriorated from friendly to nuclear was itself a story. The reaction from the MMA community was predictably divided, with passionate arguments emerging on both sides. Those who sided with Pimblett pointed to the sacredness of his friend's memory and the inappropriateness of weaponizing a suicide for social media engagement. They argued that regardless of what Pimblett had said about Hooker's mother, however crude or offensive, some subjects should remain off limits, and that Hooker's invocation of Ricky's death revealed a fundamental lack of decency that no provocation could excuse. While supporters of Hooker contended that Pimblett had initiated the personal attacks by involving Hooker's mother in such a crude and offensive hypothetical scenario, and that he had no right to claim victim status after making comments designed to humiliate and demean. They argued that Pimblett's subsequent defense of his comments as merely a hypothetical joke demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of why his original statement was so objectionable. The career trajectories of both fighters provide important context for understanding why this conflict erupted with such intensity. Pimblett, at 31 years old with his unblemished 7-0 UFC record, represents the future of the lightweight division. His trajectory has been almost impossibly steep, from regional circuit champion to UFC contender to interim title challenger in just a few short years. His knockout victory over Michael Chandler in 2025 silenced many doubters and established him as a legitimate threat to anyone in the division. Hooker represents something different, the battle-tested veteran whose best days may or may not be behind him. At 35 years old, with a career record that includes both brilliant victories and crushing defeats, Hooker occupies the challenging middle ground between contendership and gatekeeping. His recent loss to Sarakian highlighted ongoing vulnerabilities in his grappling defense, the very vulnerabilities that Pimblett chose to mock in his original interview. These divergent career paths may explain some of the intensity underlying their conflict. Pimblett, ascending rapidly toward a title shot with the confidence of a fighter who has never tasted defeat in the UFC, perhaps felt emboldened to dismiss a veteran he perceived as fading from relevance. The security of his position in the rankings combined with his upcoming title opportunity may have created a sense of invincibility that manifested in reckless trash talk aimed at someone who posed no immediate threat to his career trajectory. Hooker, watching a younger fighter leapfrog him in the rankings while simultaneously mocking his abilities in the most offensive terms imaginable, may have felt a particular sting that motivated his extreme response. The psychology of professional fighting is complex, involving ego, pride, financial pressure, and the knowledge that every performance could be the one that defines or destroys a career. For a veteran like Hooker, seeing a relative newcomer dismiss decades of work with a crude joke about his mother may have triggered something primal, a need to wound as deeply as he had been wounded, regardless of consequences. No official fight between Pimblett and Hooker has been announced, and given their respective scheduled bouts in late January 2026, such a matchup couldn't materialize until spring at the earliest. However, the on-site challenge issued by Hooker and accepted by Pimblett suggests that any future encounter between these fighters could potentially escalate beyond verbal conflict. The UFC may eventually seek to capitalize on this bad blood by booking them against each other. Such a fight would carry significant promotional weight. The brash young star against the respected veteran, the mental health advocate against the man who invoked his friend's death. The promotional possibilities are endless, even if the ethical implications of profiting from such deeply personal animosity remain troubling. From a matchmaking perspective, a Pimblett Hooker fight makes considerable sense beyond the narrative elements. Both men compete in the same division, occupy similar positions in the rankings, and possess styles that could produce an entertaining contest. Pimblett's grappling prowess against Hooker's striking would create a classic stylistic clash, while both men's willingness to engage in their histories of producing exciting fights suggest a matchup that would deliver entertainment value regardless of the personal animosity underlying it. The UFC has demonstrated repeatedly that it views genuine fighter animosity as a promotional asset rather than a problem to be managed. The most successful pay-per-views often feature fighters who genuinely despise each other, whose desire to inflict damage extends beyond professional obligation into personal vendetta. A Pimblett Hooker fight would fit perfectly into this promotional model, offering the kind of authentic bad blood that cannot be manufactured through press conference theatrics alone. However, the promotion must also consider potential downsides of such a booking. The on-site threats exchanged between both fighters raise legitimate concerns about what might happen at press conferences, weigh-ins, or other promotional events leading up to a potential fight. While controlled confrontations can generate buzz and sell tickets, genuinely hostile encounters can damage the promotion's reputation and create legal liabilities. The line between promotional theater and genuine danger can be difficult to identify, and the UFC would need to carefully manage any future interactions between these two combatants. For now, both fighters must focus on their immediate challenges. Pimblett must channel whatever emotions this conflict has stirred into his preparation for Justin Gaethje, a fight that could establish him as a legitimate champion or expose him as elevated beyond his actual skill level. Hooker must similarly compartmentalize his anger while preparing for Benoit Sandani, a fight that could reignite his title ambitions or continue his slide toward veteran gatekeeper status. The MMA community will be watching both fights with heightened interest, analyzing not just technical performances but also the psychological states of both combatants. Did this conflict provide Pimblett with extra motivation, an additional chip on his shoulder that would fuel a career-best performance against Gaethje? Or did it distract him from his preparations, introducing emotional turbulence into a camp that should have been focused entirely on the interim title? Did Hooker's aggressive response suggest a fighter who had lost emotional control, allowing anger to override judgment in ways that might carry over into his performance? Or did it reveal a warrior who refuses to be disrespected, channeling frustration into focused aggression? These questions will find their answers in the octagon, where the truth of a fighter's character ultimately reveals itself through action rather than words. The cage has a way of stripping away pretense, of exposing both strengths and weaknesses that words can obscure. Both Pimblett and Hooker will face opponents capable of testing every aspect of their preparation, their skill, and their mental fortitude. But regardless of how their upcoming fights unfold, the events of January 9th, 2026 have permanently altered the relationship between Paddy Pimblett and Dan Hooker. What was once cordial is now hostile. What was once friendly is now bitter. Enmity and the invocation of a dead friend's memory has ensured that this conflict will carry wounds that may never fully heal. In the brutal world of professional fighting, where physical violence is the currency of success, it's perhaps ironic that the deepest cuts often come from words rather than fists. Pimblett's crude hypothetical about Hooker's mother was undeniably offensive, a gratuitous insult that served no purpose beyond provocation. But Hooker's decision to respond by invoking R.I.P. Ricky to weaponize a friend's suicide for social media clout represented a different category of transgression entirely. Whether the MMA world has witnessed the beginning of a prolonged rivalry or merely a single explosive incident remains to be seen. Some fighter beefs burn hot briefly before cooling into mutual indifference. Others simmer for years before being resolved through cage competition. The Pimblett-Hooker conflict could follow either trajectory, depending on factors that neither fighter fully controls, whether the UFC chooses to book them against each other, whether they cross paths at future events, and whether time allows for any healing of the wounds inflicted on that fateful January day.